Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr.Lamba's Awakening Call. Since times immemorial, the rulers, whether they're the kings, dictators, or democratically elected leaders, have sought to control the minds and the thoughts of the people. And that is through spreading information, disinformation, and misinformation. That has been the norm practically all over the world, sometimes in a very hidden form, very subtle form, without hurting, and sometimes so blatantly it's done that it shocks. Many times it's done just to show your power, but more often than not, it's done in a manner to mold the mind of the man, manipulate their thoughts and every action. I was reading Time magazine, Charlotte Alto, and she writes, free speech has become an obsession of the most white male members of the technical elite. There's a bigger problem here now that the leaders all over, whether white or black or brown, is immaterial. They want to control the channels of communication. Yesterday, the news was there that 85% of the people in the globe do not have access to free press. And where the free press is there, that's also control. And that's not only about the mainstream media, that's also about the social media. For example, I was banned for 3 days with the Facebook for the simple reason I wrote a story and they didn't like it. But the same story was then on the mainstream media in Germany after 3 days. I got my information just before that was leaked to the press. So that has been going on. Historically, you see, it has been there all the time, and I'll come to that. But what has taken the cake is when blatantly the strongest country in the world, the country which presumes itself to be the leader of democracy, of free world, and a custodian of freedom of expression, where the First Amendment is sacrosanct. That sets up a ministry or an office which, according to some media, is Ministry of Disinformation. And that's aiming at controlling the channels of communication in an effort to suppress freedom of speech. And this is what CNN, the darling of the establishment, says, that they want to suppress freedom of speech. And for that and in view, the Department of Homeland Security has established a new agency. A new department has been created to fight disinformation on media matters like Twitter. Now, while the ostensible reason is to fight disinformation, don't you think it's quite possible that it might also be used and would be used to fight the real correct information and feed the people with good information? As with many things, propaganda, which aims at molding and controlling the minds of the people, can be used for good and evil, depending on who dispenses it. And the prime motive for any ruler is to keep a control. During World War II, American propaganda was considerably, according to the winners, a necessary tool in the pursuit of victory, and they call it a moral cause. That has always been there. When the Crusades were there, both the Muslims and the Christians considered their fight to be moral fight, ethical values. But while America was indulging in this propaganda, Germany and Japan had their own propaganda machines to advance their own agendas. And that's what BBC was doing. As a matter of fact, most of the clandestine activity in Germany was done with the help, aid, and active assistance of BBC. The Nazi propaganda was headed by Joseph Goebbels, and he, as a propaganda minister, interior minister, had made it a very fine science. He used the term the big lie, and he said, if you tell a lie long enough, 1,000 times, people will believe it to be true. Then, there was a Japanese propaganda, famous Tokyo Rose. Several women they called Tokyo Rose. It was aimed at demoralizing the Western troops by telling them they were losing the war. In the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin employed newspaper Pravda and Izvestia and TV news shown to lie to his people. He and his successors used jamming devices to keep information from Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Liberty. They could not read the Russian people. And Kuznets is doing to the freedom by media. And that's always doing. India, would you believe that the first Prime Minister, the paragon of liberty, banned media from playing the songs of a poet because he had shown the real picture of the Indian simicide. Now here comes the tragedy. As I said, the leader of the free world announces the new office within the Department of Homeland Security. And the purpose is, as I said, and as what they say, to police disinformation and misinformation. Some critics are comparing it to the Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's novel 1984. And there are curious similarities to that. The Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's novel is exactly what this department is going to do. And that's why we call it Ministry of Disinformation. And look at it. The head of this new department, the leader, the CEO would be Nina Jankovic. Now, Nina Jankovic styles herself as Mary Poppins on TikTok. I don't know whether people have seen it or not. It's a social media platform. It's owned by the Chinese Communist government, and it is a font of disinformation, which should be alarming. And there, Nina Jankovic is always seen as Mary Poppins. So people don't know that Mary Poppins is a very strong person in the White House establishment. And she'll be heading this new department. And if you remember, it is the same lady who spread disinformation about Hunter Biden's laptop, which she said was a product of Donald Trump's presidential propaganda. It was she who joined Democrats and led them, calling Trump colluded with Russia to help him win the presidency. The British newspaper Daily Mail reported that Nina shared misleading tweets about COVID-19 masks, and she claimed that President Trump would embolden ISIS, and she praised a British spy behind the debunked Russian dossier. So she has clearly proved herself to be an agenda. Now there was one comment by Gulshan Sethi. He says, would they be able to control social media? That's exactly the purpose. Controlling major media is already in the hands of the government, and they're doing it. For example, in Canada, $600 million every year are given to media so that they do not go astray. And who will say no when they are getting more than $500 million? So, the comment of Gulshan Sethi is very clear that that would happen, and it's quite possible it will happen. You see, there are always two things. One is a possibility and the other is probability. Here both are likely to be there. Now, question arises, why would anyone believe that the US government, or for that matter any government, whether it's Russia, whether it's USA, France, India, Pakistan, whatever, could be the arbiter of what is truth and what is false? The whole thing negates the freedom of speech. And as I said yesterday, it was clear from the report yesterday that 85% people of the globe do not get the proper information. Are you aware? I was shocked yesterday to see that during the Freedom March, Ottawa, there was surveillance aircraft over Ottawa, seeing what's happening, and it was being operated by the Canadian Armed Forces. Now let's look at the history. Let's take a brief trip down the memory lane to disabuse people. You remember President Dwight Eisenhower, Ike, lied about U-2 flights over Russia. USA's history of the president's lying. So, I will not go into the hoary past. So, Eisenhower lies about U-2 flights after Gary Powers was downed by Russia. John Kennedy, the handsome heartthrob of millions of Americans, lied about a missile gap between USA and Soviet Union. Lyndon Johnson lied about the Gulf of Tonkin incident that got US more deeply into the muddy waters of Vietnam. Richard Nixon lied about the Watergate. Jimmy Carter, who prided himself on his integrity and being a peanut farmer, who promised never to lie to the Americans, engaged what can charitably be called disinformation in his book Keeping Faith. And a British Washington Post reviewer said that he did not really keep faith. Ronald Reagan lied about the aid to the Contras in Iran. George Bush lied about not raising taxes. Bill Clinton lied about Monica Lewinsky. Barack Obama lied when he said about Obamacare, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. And Donald Trump lied millions of times. As my Washington Post says, 30,000 times. And you can't always call these lies to be fake news. And now we have President Biden who lies about how well the economy is doing. And his Secretary of the Homeland Security lies about the southern borders being secure, which they are not. So this new office should be considered the worst kind of propaganda machine. It will most likely focus on censoring or denying anything that makes Biden administration and Democrats look any worse than they already are looking for. A difficult task, of course, but maybe this is a last effort to stem the tide against them. There are plenty of ways Americans who are unsure of what's true and what is not can find out independent of an administration, any administration, that understandably has a personal and political interest in the public believing what they tell us. And that's happening all over the world. The governments want to show that they are lily white, pure, honest. And they may be absolutely the other way around. Now, when this news came that the new agency has been set up with Jankovic as the head, the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, said they want to be, the purpose is, now this is the most important thing, a governor of a province saying they want to be able to put out false narrative without people being able to speak and fight back. So it's gagging the people, it's making the people mute, but not deaf, just dumb and mute. But would the administration get away with this one? This is the beginning. And if this is the beginning, you can be sure the next step would be that the country up north, Canada, would follow suit. And then this infection, this pandemic might become a pandemic. It already has assumed epidemic proportions by the governments controlling. But till now they were controlling indirectly, obliquely. And when the control becomes blatantly open, then the whole concept of integrity, honesty, is replaced by brazen-faced lying, hypocrisy, sham, and cant. And that's a tragedy of the administration today. This Ministry of Misinformation, or rather say disinformation, would be possibly the last nail in the coffin of human freedom and the freedom of expression. And that is something which is abominable, hateful, disgusting, and in fact an antithesis of freedom, antithesis of human rights, and people would be molded in the way George Orwell had thought of in 1984. What a tragedy for the bad guy. Thank you.